Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hi everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2610 of The Tom Woods Show, and I couldn't be happier to be joined today by Mark Changizi, who is a cognitive scientist with a great many fascinating things to say about a wide variety of topics. The only overlap, I would say, between the kind of output Mark has and the kind of output I have is that we are too interested in too many things to stay focused on one narrow area of expertise. That would drive me crazy and bore me to death. And so, for example, Mark's most recent book, it just seems out of left field. It's called Motorcycle Mind, The Secrets Behind the Coolest Invention Ever. And yet he's written on a vast array of topics. So just my kind of guy. And wouldn't you know it, 5 years ago, because here we are, gosh, at just about the 5-year anniversary of all this craziness, he suddenly became a freedom fighter like you and me, because all decent people had to be pulled into this struggle that we all had. So I've been following him on Twitter for years and thinking, boy, this guy would make a fascinating guest. And I never approached him. And then he approached me. You know, that's sometimes how things have to happen at the Tom Woods Show. Welcome, Mark.
Great to be here, Tom.
All right. So I absolutely want to talk about this motorcycle book, but I want to prime people for it by first introducing them to you through some topics that, you know, are more familiar to the Tom Woods Show. So here we are, as we record this, we're getting toward the end of February 2025, which means 5 years ago was the end of February 2020. And I look back on that, Mark, February 2020, I was in London at a Dream Theater concert at the old Hammersmith Odeon. It's now something else, the Apollo or something. And I have that photo of the audience with their phone lights. They're all turned on. And this was like one of my last photos of the normal world, because the week that everything went crazy in March of 2020, I was in New York and I was seeing the craziness begin right before my eyes as I flew home. And now it's like it was just all a bad dream. But what I'd like to know is, you know, people say, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Well, where were you and what were you up to when suddenly you realized the world is going out of its blankety blank mind?
Right. Yeah. And this is actually an embarrassing question for a lot of the anti-lockdowners, because if you actually go back, I have sort of long threads on Twitter. Many of the anti-lockdowners took a month, 4 months, 8 months, a year, sometimes before they turned around and realized they were fooled or they were tricked, is the way they interpreted it to themselves. And they were fanning the flames of panic in February and March. And they look back and say, well, just 2 weeks, it would have been okay. But I eventually realized it wasn't as dangerous as they say. And so well, you're telling me that had the science been different, it would have been okay to violate civil liberties en masse? Are you telling me that that's what civil liberties means to you? That, or worse, I was confused about the data, and so it was okay to violate civil liberties en masse. You know, that's not how civil liberties work. Civil liberties are especially for the emergencies. And I was actually in Turkey at the time, and I was giving a talk in Turkey, and then my wife, who's Iranian, and I'm Iranian as well, but she's ordering. She was going to go to Iran, but SH was hitting the fan right about then. We said, it's probably not a good idea to go to Iran, and Iran became one of the sort of hotspots of mania right around the sort of similar time as Italy. So we came home, and my first tweet was on March 10th, trying to calm people down. And even then, even some of the mainstream BBC-like media was actually posting reasonably tempered kind of information about, it's really hitting folks with comorbidities. But there was just too much momentum. The populace was sort of demanding action, do something about this super dangerous virus we're all afraid of. And so a lot of the governments originally was, the UK, even China originally was trying to say, calm down, this isn't a big deal. But most of them could not withstand the bottom-up pressure saying, no, you've got to do something. So they all pretended to lead, and they all then started to also agitate for lockdowns and perverse interventions which would never work and were extremely violating of civil liberties, only the kind of thing that you would ever expect something like China to do. So I watched as everybody. It was libertarians, it was conservatives, it was the left that you'd expect, but everybody in March, around March 10 to the rest of March, was all in lockstep. Not all. We had people like you and me hadn't found each other. We were all. I thought I was going crazy. I was just like 2 + 2 = 5, and I was like, I'm going a little nuts. And so eventually, we all kind of found each other and coalesced. And I created a Twitter group where I could really find these folks. And I said, I can't just sit there while all these supposedly principled libertarian types, or classical liberals, or conservative libertarian types, just completely caved in terms of all of their principles when they were actually tested by an emergency. None of those principles, none of their supposed principles, in fact, stuck. And it was the intellectual dark web failed. Libertarians failed. Some of my first folks that were actually on my side were lowercase c communists, who, surprisingly, but they were so far left that they have a chip on their shoulder in terms of functioning, centralized economies, and knowing that they always mess it up. And I'm like, you can't just freeze an economy, so they're really touchy about frozen economies and having bread lines and cheese lines and stuff. So they were like, you can't do that, because they know how to. But I couldn't even find libertarians. So I kind of jumped into the fray and became known not just as sort of the scientist with a bunch of discoveries that I'm well known for, but sort of ended up known within certain pockets of the anti-lockdown and the sort of COVID authoritarianism fighting group. I became known in that group as well.
It's such an important point you make, by the way, about the bottom-up pressure, because I would love to be able to tell the story of innocent citizens were unjustly put upon by their political overlords. Now, there was plenty of that.
I did that too, yeah, sure.
Yeah, but there is that other side of the coin, that people were screaming for this. They wanted something to be done. And whenever they ask for something to be done, it's always the wrong thing and stupid and destructive, and this was no different. But as time went on, I was thinking, well, people value their lives enough that after a couple months of this, they're going to be going stir crazy. They're going to say, all right, this was ridiculous. Enough's enough. But they still, they prided themselves on snitching on people and being moralizers about if you would just follow the rules, you would have good results, but you don't, so you deserve what's coming to you. I could not look at mankind the same way after that. I couldn't look at people I see every day the same way after that.
And I don't want to compare what folks in China had to go through with the Cultural Revolution, or in Iran with the Islamic Revolution, or in Nazi Germany. But we witnessed a strong taste of totalitarianism. It was really a kind of totalitarianism. One good definition of what is totalitarianism. A lot of people say, well, that's just where you've got top-down control, and it's so done so well they can control everywhere that you are. No, totalitarianism is decentralized authoritarianism. And it's decentralized because there's a sufficient fraction of the population, 10%, 50%, 70%. It's not quite, it doesn't really matter. They're the ones that are organized and aggressive and belligerent about it, and very moral and have a mania about it. They police it bottom up. These are once you get stitches, you get children reporting their parents, neighbors reporting their parents and their neighbors in terms of how many people they had at their house. Totalitarianism is infinitely more scary than just pure top-down bullies in government, tin top dictators in Africa that try to control the population. Everybody just piss off if we're not paying any attention, because there is no social mania. There is no moral cult, socio-political community that was ushered in with the new dictator that shot somebody and just took over in those cases. But when it really is, when there's a new dictator, and it's a big problem, it's usually because they're carried on the backs of a new movement, and they truly believe, and they start to create narratives which further and further justify post hoc the crazy crap that they were saying in the first month. So, and originally, remember, there was no masks. They were advised not to wear masks. But masks serve as a great membership signal in terms of how much you care about your fellow man in terms of COVID. So it serves as a good membership signal, because those who aren't part of the COVID cult would definitely not wear a mask, and it wasn't even advised. So it serves as a really good membership signal, because it has to be found crazy or something the other side wouldn't do. But the way these dynamics always work, the evolution of socio-political communities, is that once you have a membership signal and then people start to wear it, the community will start to come up with post hoc bullshit justifications for why it's not just a good membership signal because it serves as arbitrary. No, they'll come up with post hoc justifications for why it's good, why it works. And this will happen at small scales in some communities where the ladies wear Lululemons and other communities they wear different kinds of things. And they'll justify, well, it helps my legs breathe. All communities do this, but these larger scales, they can be highly ill. And so within months, there were hundreds of observational studies published in real journals, thousands of articles trying to justify in different kinds of arguments, different kinds of ways. And if you were in that socio-political community and you came up with one of these arguments or one of these twists or one of these new ways of explaining it, you would rise in reputation with that community. There's all this new reputation to be had. And suddenly it's like, going out to California to get the riches of there's nuggets of gold there you go. When there's a new community with all this righteousness in it, people rush there because there's reputation to be had. Suddenly all this reputation is flowing. And you get that by coming up with new kinds of justifications for the shit that they already believe, right? And that's exactly what happened. So post hoc justifications began to further and further cement the weird, radical, rushed emergency interventions that were put forth. But they only become more concretized over time.
Hey everybody, the great Ron Paul guy Dave Lafredo lost 60 pounds and got key markers of his health back. And he did it thanks to the accountability he got in my fitness group, which is one of the 11 gazillion benefits of my school of life. Here's Dave.
Before I joined the group, I had I weighed 226 pounds. I had a blood test that showed inflammation super high, borderline diabetic. And at first I lost 40 pounds in 15, now it's 60. My blood test came back almost perfect. I've done diets before, and I've done diets that had worked, but then you kind of you fall back and you fall off. And there were times where I fell off the diet here, but it was just a matter of sending me a rocket chat message to somebody in the group or to get onto the group and say, hey, this is where I'm struggling. And they always had the right advice to what you can do instead. I didn't have clothes. Everything I was trying on was falling off me, and I didn't want to go buy because I didn't know how much more I was going to lose. So yeah, the weight just flew off, especially the weight size. I kind of feel like maybe it was that your school was my answer. I really do. There's too much good stuff came out of it, and I really thought my world was falling apart. I was hitting rock bottom. So,
wow,
thank you.
Wow.
There's a saying about you're only as good as your 5 closest people, and I think I've replaced most of my closest people with Tom Woods people.
Wow,
and that's changed my life. It really has. I feel like I'm a better person, better father, better husband, better son.
Now, I obviously can't guarantee you results like that, but that's the kind of thing accountability can do for you. So check it out at onebucktrial.com. And now it's like, that's all. But with the exception of the handful of crazy people you see wearing masks even now, like that, those people you just can't, those people are just broken. And I can't do anything about them. And it's a shame that they were so highly suggestible that they let this happen to them. But for the most part, this is like behind us. And there's been little to no reckoning. I mean, in fact, I can't even say little to. There's really been no reckoning about this. Nothing happened to anybody. There's been no serious formal acknowledgement that really, really serious, if we want to be generous and call them mistakes, were made. Nothing at all. That people's lives were ruined for no reason. All the other things that were done, disruptive things that were done, evil things that were done, obviously dumb things that were done. No official acknowledgement of it at all. If a private company did this, they'd be out of business. We'd be laughing at them forever. But it's like we've got this superstitious reverence toward these people because they are our sacred political overlords that we were taught in second grade are just pursuing the common good innocently. I just can't get over that. I mean, I talk about other topics, but I wrote a book on COVID just last year because I feel like if we haven't gotten some kind of resolution of this, then the subject can't be closed.
Yeah. I mean, I think one reason why it's very hard to have a real conversation about this is that even the anti-lockdown side, as I started with it, is many of them, a and again, I've got lists of hundreds of them that were some of the highest profile folks. Tucker Carlson, for example, was one of the folks that, purposely reached out to Trump to show up to convince him. He wrote an article about how dangerous, COVID is. And he was one of the agitators for panic. Almost most of the biggest leaders in the anti-lockdown community, when you look at it, their behavior, they were part of the crowds agitating for panic. And they don't want that to be dug up. It doesn't make them look good. I'm not saying that they are culpable amongst millions of people. And they're more culpable the louder their voice, the more that they, longer that they did it, and the more that they had a formal role of responsibility. But almost all the sides were, in fact, part of this social mania at the beginning, and then it eventually polarized into more typical left-right lines. So, people sometimes, I've heard different arguments. My attitude is that we need a reckoning. But a lot of other folks that are maybe a little bit more mature than me say, the way that you get past these kinds of totalitarian things is just, you got to let it drop. You have to let the people save face to move on. And that's the only way you're going to be able to let it move on. So I don't really know the right answer to that. But the other problem is that a lot of the folks that are whether they were originally lockdowners or not, and they're now anti-lockdowners. A lot of the powerful voices believe that it was a 20-year cabal designed from 2002. All of this was set up to create a virus, to create a fake virus or perceived virus, and to let it out so that you could have depopulation, or you could have chips in us, or you could have all these different kinds of things. And this was all part of a huge, long, couple-decade plan. That is to miss the entire moral of crimes against humanity, democides, and genocides. These genocides and democides and crimes against humanity, which will keep on hitting humankind, happen not because there's some evil cabal on the outside, usually the Jews or something like this. No, it happens because of a failure of the way that social communities, the socio-political physics, has its own kind of physics, and understand why we end up with these kinds of moral righteousness and willingness to kill millions of people and crush their heads is something that goes way beyond the evils of mafias and cabals. Mafias are never willing to kill millions of people. It's just business, right? They kill but they don't. Only those in a socio-political cult are willing to do the stuff that we have found in the 20th century and prior to that. So these are the kinds of things that we have to understand. And as I focus a lot of my 500 episodes in my Science Moment series at YouTube and Rumble on trying to understand the socio-political physics. People have an amazing. If you show people starlings like these, the starlings, the flocks of starlings, and there's 10,000 or whatever, or even 1 million starlings and the birds, and they're doing all these flocks, and it's beautiful. And if you ask people who's in charge, like, oh, there's no one in charge. It's some kind of complex emergent dynamics. Hell if I know. But then if you say, okay, what if it's 100 million or 500 million people and a much smarter individually and much more complex, network of interactions that drives all this? Why is it doing what it's doing? Oh, well, there's some cabal, and and this particular group is doing it. Oh, it's like somehow they have they somehow have a hubris about that they can understand human flocks at tremendously large scales, but they totally have humility about when it's just a bunch of starlings and birds. So it's a strange thing, but it's infinitely more complex than even starlings. And to understand that, you have to be the kind of physicist, kind of type he thinks about emergent phenomena and what happens in large groups. And so that's very complicated. And that's the kind of stuff we need to understand so we don't end up with COVID-like and worse mass hysterias and the consequent crimes against humanity.
What a case study it was, though. I mean, this kind of hysteria is the kind of thing you read about in the history book. And of course, everybody reading about it in the history book thinks, well, if I'd been alive then, of course, I would have had a cool head, unlike all these stupid idiots. But, apparently not. Apparently not. So let's.
Well, you're right. But sorry, just as you said, what will the history books even say? Right? The history books, I'm not convinced that they're going to say it's a mass hysteria. They say, all these people, they've helped save us from this terrible pandemic. Right. That's
no, right. Absolutely they won't. But there is a chance, though, that this is a pretty slim pickings in terms of consolation, but there's a chance that like in 100, 150 years, when everybody and his grandparents who were related to this whole thing are all dead, that dispassionate people might look back and say, yeah, that was hysteria. I mean, most of the time, during the hysteria, you're not going to get the right answer from any of the books that are written. But you could imagine somebody who has no axe to grind looking back and saying, this was really a dumb, silly thing that people did. And everybody will say, oh, geez, yeah, if only they could have been sensible people like I wish that were the case, but unfortunately it does not appear to be so. So here's what I want to ask you about. You just posted, I think you might have actually pinned it on your Twitter. I know I'm supposed to call it X, but I hate that. So if you were talking about AI and how impressed we all are by these large language models. And the fact is, they are very impressive. I mean, this is well beyond playing Zork when I was a kid in the 80s. Zork was an Infocom game that it was text only, but it wasn't AI. It was just you type in this and it will respond that, and you would proceed through the story. But that's like peanuts compared to what these things can do. But you had this very important caveat that you just posted about when we're sitting here marveling at the brilliance of AI, we need to remember what exactly it is we are truly marveling at. So I'm going to leave that to you.
Yeah, so let me give you an example before we talk about LLMs and AI. So, for example, right now you've got different kinds of markets. You've got the stock market, and this is with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people with varying amounts of stake, and they're all simultaneously betting in some sense about which stocks they think are going to do well. And you end up, something that emerges is all this sort of crowd intelligence. Markets create a kind of crowd intelligence. Now, you have lots of people that are building automated sort of computer programs to try to utilize that and then make predictions better, try to make money. And there's dumber versions of those automated algorithms, and there's smarter versions of those automated algorithms, and they all have different kinds of things that they might want to do with it. Now, if someone was having a conversation about those automated algorithms, they're like, my automated algorithm is so smart at predicting what's going to happen, in terms of the economy. But it's leveraging, it's harnessing the crowd in this emergent market. That's what makes it smart, is because already the crowd, and through these market mechanisms, it's selecting the crowd so that it can create this kind of wisdom in the shape of these markets and the kinds of buying and selling. That's what markets do. You end up with this kind of wisdom that is forced out of the crowd by virtue of that. So it would be silly in some sense to say, so your automated algorithm says, well, yeah, there's some smarter and some dumber, but really the intelligence comes from the crowd and the market mechanisms that induce it. So, that's how LLMs work, of course. LLMs depend, you could say, it's on a bunch of human text out there that's read in, or a bunch of images, but that's not the right way to think about it. And you could say, well, it's dependent upon people to the extent that people have written all these things. No, it's dependent upon there having been a public square, a free, a marketplace of ideas for thousands of years. It's that marketplace of ideas, the free expression network, where people have argued, and people who were better arguers or better ideas rose in reputation over time. And businesses, of course, that do better rise. It's the same kinds of ideas. It's these selection pressures over thousands of years by which ideas spread and expanded, reputations went up and other reputations went down. Those are the market mechanisms that shaped the kinds of data that we then force into these AIs. And some AIs are smarter, but really what makes them smarter is the extent to which they have the ability with these simple kind of calculations just to absorb all of those market mechanism genius data that we have through these market mechanisms created over hundreds or thousands of years, depending on how you want to think about it. So it's intelligence. The AI is intelligence. There's no question it's intelligent, but where is it getting the lion's share of that intelligence? It's not because of the algorithms per se being run. It's getting that intelligence because of free expression in the public, in the marketplace of ideas that's been there for all of this time, even if it's been dirty, not fully free. This is another avenue. I'm always arguing for different ways of appreciating and understanding what free expression is really all about. And with it's free expression that underlies the ability for us to have this sort of these networks of knowledge networks and the people that are associated with them with their higher or lower reputations. And it's that which explains why AIs are as smart as they are today. And it's just having a better ability to pull it in and find out its structure that's already out there.
In other words, the creative work was carried out by human brains over the course of many centuries of, and not just isolated thought, but of interaction with other brains. It's a matter of, it's a human body of knowledge. And it
it's
is
the selection, and it's the market itself that I want to really emphasize. Without that, if you had a billion people in billion different labs interacting with one another, you wouldn't have a market. You wouldn't have created the kind of knowledge that we have. You wouldn't have, free markets don't work well. They wouldn't be free markets if it's not the constant interaction and vying with one another. It's that vying and fighting, and what makes it a market is the production of intelligence by virtue of the crowd and the way the markets interact. That's what creates the intelligence that LLMs rely on.
Hey everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO Expert Search Engine Optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. So there is the possibility that we could, if we were dumb enough, we could screw this whole thing up that yielded these things that we marvel at. And this thing that would be that marketplace you're talking about.
That's right. Obviously, you would hope that the continued marketplace of ideas is kept free, so we're able to continue to create great data for it, although now it's smart enough that it might be able to create its open data sometimes. So a lot of the data that it's being trained on is AI generated data or induced by it. So that's a whole other kind of complex conversation, but yeah.
All right. I'm trying to think of where I want to go here. Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about this, even though I know it's not like your main area of work. It's like everywhere we look, there is some kind of quote unquote AI aspect to it. And I can see, I am in no way a Luddite. There's no way anyone could accuse me of that. I'm not anti-technology. I think there are ways that AI can make my life drastically easier. I'll give you a quick example. I had a business proposal in my mind that I wanted to make to somebody. And I wanted to, because it was something that I know this person should do and would be really prosperous with it, but would never actually do it unless I did it for him and then just handed it to him. So, but I wanted to lay it out in the form of a formal business proposal. So what I did was I went to ChatGPT. I said, all right, here's what I'm planning to do. Generate a business proposal out of this. And it was the most beautiful business proposal you've ever seen in your life. And it saved me 2 hours that I spent with my family. There's nothing bad about that. But now when I go to write an email, I'm being told, would you like some help writing? And now what I kind of fear, maybe this is just me as a snob, that it took me years to perfect the craft of writing, that it annoys me that now I'm going to start getting emails with the same somewhat elegant, but also somewhat predictably plain and computer-esque kind of prose coming at me from absolutely everybody on earth.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the ways that, for those who pride themselves on a certain level of education, we would implicitly signal it by virtue of the choice of words and the way that we structure our sentences, either spoken or written. And that is no longer a signal of the kind of education level you have any longer at all. I did a science moment on this, 100 moments ago. Really, there's just no reason to try to talk like that, because any foreigner who's never even spoken English can suddenly send over an email that hits all those things. It doesn't even have to sound computerish. They can say, make it sound like William F. Buckley wrote it, and it'll sound like William F. Buckley wrote it, right? So better it would be to come up with your own unique style that is peculiar to you and maybe breaks the rules, because there's no sense in getting all of your I's before E, except that all this kind of stuff showing how smart you are, because that's no longer works as a signal for those sorts of things at all. So there's probably going to be an evolution of that over the next 10 to, it's already probably happening. People are already breaking free of the kinds of trying to be so to the book to show how smart we are, because there's no reason for that anymore.
All right. Now that I think I have prepared the way, let's talk motorcycles here. Now, I've never ridden on one. The only time when I was a kid, I rode in a sidecar. That was it. So I don't know what the thrill is, but I have no doubt that it's there of riding a motorcycle. So your book, Motorcycle Mind, the way this thing is written, it's extremely approachable. Like there's a manageable amount of text on each page. There are illustrations. It's written in a very, very approachable style. And it's not simply one man's reflection on the thrill of being on a motorcycle. It's much deeper than that. So talk to those of us who are on the sidelines of this and tell me what's exciting about it.
Yeah, I mean, and just as a little back, I mean, I've got a bunch about the 6 other books. I mean, this was a book on the vision revolution, on why we see illusions and why we have color. So really understanding the cues for why we see the way we do, where we evolve. These are all discoveries of mine. And my last book was on the origins of emotional expressions. And then other books over here on the origins of music. So all of these things were substantive discoveries that are academically deemed important. And Motorcycle Mind is not that kind of book, right? So it's not like academia has been wondering, hey, why is it exactly that people love to ride motorcycles? What explains the experience? But all of these books, all these previous books, it's the kind of expertise that I've had at these aspects of vision or auditory stuff or even emotional expressiveness come out in the various chapters. So, one of the main chapters is trying to explain the extent to which you are one with the machine, that you really become one with the bike. And that's something that can't happen. In fact, the whole book is in some sense about that, but one more specifically. In a car, there's a lot of content, but let me just try to give you an intuition. When you're in a car and you turn sharp around the corner, you turn right. Well, your body slams left into the door, right? And you got to hold yourself still to prevent yourself from slamming into the door. Now, one thing that's true about a motorcycle, and you may not have thought about it, if you imagine sitting on a motorcycle at an arcade game, and you go, oh, look, this is the coolest arcade game I've ever seen because it's got this motorcycle sitting there. And when you turn right, the thing's going to lean right. And it's going to lean that's like the coolest arcade game ever when you're a kid. But that's not what it's like to ride a motorcycle, because on a motorcycle, when you lean right, you don't feel any forces to the right. You don't have to hold on. If you're playing that arcade game at the arcade, it feels like you're going to fall off. You got to hold yourself on like you're on a bucking bronco, right? On a real motorcycle, when you go right, gravity is still going through your spine, through your seat, and into the wheels. As far as you're concerned, you're still straight, and the whole world has bent left. And so sometimes my wife is sick. We don't even have any cars. My wife is feeling sick and she's exhausted at the end of the night, and she's just sort of hugging me from on the back. And I'm not worried about her falling off at all, because as long as she's not literally just falling limp, because no matter how much I turn left and right, there is no gravity left or right pulling her. It's completely always down. So it's a kind of magical bubble that you find yourself in. And, motorcyclists sort of intuitively get this, but they may not have thought it through. Go, yeah, it's actually like a bubble. Like the entire gravity of the universe doesn't matter. I'm just always straight, and the whole world was bending to my will. Right?
Well, can I read a little passage here? Because you say, in other respects, it's not at all like any earthly creature. It carries with it a gravity bubble such that it always feels as if down is through the seat of the bike and the world leans rather than you. And it's weightless, massless, and is able to somehow levitate itself without having any seeming way to do so. But is it really the motorcycle, that has these powers? Or is it really you, the rider, who has these mystical powers? And then you go on. I mean, this is the way the book is written. That's why it's so approachable.
Yeah, and I'll mention just another. There's a lot more to say about that chapter, but another part of it is and this is true about actually manual transmission in general. I've always had manual transmission cars when I had them, but I got rid of my cars down here in Miami because it's just too easy to get around town lane splitting with a motorcycle. But no one has manual transmission cars for the most part anyway. But motorcycles and any manual transmission makes you a full emotionally expressive agent in a particular way. So, in my book, Express as Human with Tim Barber, we worked out from first principles exactly what emotional expressions are for. They are a socio-emotional language that allows us to negotiate. In fact, they're exactly the negotiation system that animals who don't have proper language need. And when you're on the road, you're constantly signaling. You're constantly engaged in emotional signals. Even in a car, you're kind of either wiggling or slamming your brakes or making revs. You do lots of things, but you're kind of autistic in some sense compared to a manual transmission. In a manual transmission, you have a whole other dimension, not just accelerating or making acceleration sounds, basically all you can really do unless you're using your arms out the window. But on a motorcycle, you can engine brake, which has its own kind of sound, or you can accelerate, but also you can choose whether you're going to be in a high gear relative to your speed or a low gear. And that changes what's called the tension, or whether you're I'm serious right now versus whether I'm casual. So you end up with a full two-dimensional space of emotional expressions, which are in fact the same two-dimensional space that all social animals have. And so this is why one of the many reasons for why motorcycles seem like animals. They seem like beasts with actual emotional expressions. They're just so expressive everywhere they go. And instead of me having to emotionally signal with my gestures and my facial expression, which I, of course, sometimes also do, we just are constantly emotionally expressing. We're not just making sounds for the sake of making sounds. Sometimes we are. But we're really doing it so we can signal our intentions, signal that we're being conciliatory right now. You go in front of me, or aggressive, let me in front because I'm demanding. Or there's a whole two-dimensional space of these. We're expressing ourselves for our own safety so that we can, but it also makes it, again, another way in which you're one with the machine. And so there's a whole chapter on the extent to which we really feel and emote through the vehicle itself in exactly the ways that we do through our own body.
Well, what's wrong with the common idea of non-motorcycle riders that the thrill of riding the motorcycle is the speed at which you're traveling?
Yeah, I mean, so at first, one of the chapters is really trying to understand the intuitions behind it. Obviously, there's something fun about the speed. But of course, when you think about it, we're all hurtling through space right now at, a gazillion miles per hour. So it's clearly not per se about the speed, but it's obviously about the perceived speed. And so then to understand really what the thrill is about, you have to understand, okay, what drives the perception of speed? So I had a TED talk, for example, on why we see illusions. And the reason that we see illusions is because of the way that we perceive speed. And so when you have these when you've got these optic flows and you've got two vertical lines and you perceive the two vertical lines to be like this and sort of all these spokes, that's because you perceive those lines as optic flow cues that you're moving forward. Because whenever you move forward in the world, all things in the world are sliding outwards in your retina, creating all of these optic flow. So you have to understand the kinds of cues of this one kind of cue. And I talked about several other kinds of cues, including the wind itself is a different kind of cue, and auditory cues, including echolocation of your own sounds reflecting off things in the world, and how these things provide the cues to your own speed. And if those cues aren't there, then it doesn't really matter how fast you're going, the thrill is gone. And so it's talking through exactly what the thrill of a motorcycle is all about. And the thrill of speed is sort of a catch-all phrase, but to really understand what it is requires that chapter. And it's not about the speed per se at all.
Are you a proselytizer of the motorcycle or simply one who appreciates it?
I'm more of an appreciator. I'm not much of a proselytizer now. I mean, I'll say you should try it, but a lot of people, it's just not their thing. They think it's super dangerous. They have their own perceptions and lines they don't want to cross, so I don't really push them too hard, no.
Is it wrong to think of motorcycles as being especially dangerous?
I mean, there's many things to say about this, including one of the things that's on this is whether you should wear a helmet or not, and this is even amongst motorcyclists. And controversially, I've argued that it's certainly I do wear a helmet often if I'm going on longer, going on an hour on the highway. I'm at 70 miles per hour. It's just so loud in your ears. It provides better perception to have some kind of helmet just to dull that kind of loud sound and so much wind in your eyes. But when you're in highly varying cars moving in and out of Miami and you're doing lane splitting, you're doing crazy stuff on the fly. If you have a helmet, the typical, if I just had a bicycle helmet, it'd be fine. But when you have a helmet, you're cutting off significant parts of your peripheral visual field. Your lower visual field is gone. Sides are gone. Most people don't have any conscious appreciation for what's lost. That's where you're getting all this feedback on the optic flow. And that's how you provide the self-guided, the brilliant acrobatic behavior that we have relies on those kinds of far periphery field stuff that you don't ever consciously appreciate. So from my point of view, I would prefer to often have a much better athleticism in some sense to see and to feel and to get all the responses and to avoid an accident in the first place. And so, in fact, nature and evolution itself made a similar compromise. So this is something I used to work on brain evolution, why brains are shaped the way they are. And my advisor had argued why brains are, why brain and nervous systems are organized the way they are to say wire. And you might ask yourself, all the animals except for us, they lead with their head, whether they're fish or dogs, whatever. Their head is out in front. That's the front that's got to bump into stuff. And they're often moving fast. Birds are moving seriously fast. They run into a window, which is, of course, not a very ecologically natural thing, but they run into stuff. If they had their brain instead in their chest, well, they'd be a lot safer. Instead, they're putting their brain in this very precarious spot out in the leading, spots. They have a little bit of a skull, but still, that's a terrible place to put a brain in terms of safety. So if you're interested in just 100% safety, then you would put your brain in your chest, in the chest cage, the rib cage, away from the front. But the downside of that is all the brain would be safer. That's sort of the helmet equivalent. Although you'd have a helmet now, proper, better helmet around your brain. Now the brain is far from most of the senses. Most of the senses in all these animals, is 90% of them are up in the head, the eyes, the nose, the ears, all of them. And so you want short delays. You want your brain right there, so there's no delay. So you get all this. So you get maximum perception of the world and interaction and acrobaticism. So with the trade-off for them was that I'd rather have a more dangerously, precariously placed brain with the benefit of having much better coordination in the world and quicker reflexes and so forth. So that kind of argument, a lot of people just don't get it. Like, no, the more you cover your head, the safer you are. Yeah, but eventually, if I had, if it was one of those underwater, old-fashioned ones with a little hole here, I'd have a really safe head, but I'd barely be able to see. I'd be getting in accidents all the time. So it's obviously can't just be that better head protection is always safer. At some point, it's an inverted view. So I think it is a much more complicated question as to its dangers in terms of relative kind of protective gear. Surely it's more dangerous than driving, of course, right? But a lot of the fun of life is enjoying the kinds of experiences you get through lots of kinds of dangers in life, whether it's mountain climbing or lots of things that we do that we cherish have dangers that are significantly higher than sitting on your couch.
Well, your very last chapter takes head on your claim in the subtitle that the motorcycle is the coolest invention ever. But I think the course of the book is laying out more or less why that is. And then at the end, you're summing it up. But how would you make, and again, we're not saying that I'm holding you to this, that of all inventions in the world, you literally have it as number one, but what exactly is it about this that would at least even put it, even plausibly in the running?
Well, I mean, a lot of the reason that, and again, it's partially, obviously this is like the coffee shops in New York that all say they're the best coffee in the world or whatever. Right. So, but much of the reason for why one can make the claim that motorcycles are the coolest invention in the world is because of the denominator. That is because it's so few parts. It's such a simple thing. It's just a heavy bike with an engine, with a strong engine. So, if I showed you an iPhone and it's got 4 gazillion parts that have had 4 gazillion humans involved in building, and so it's like, okay, I'm not that surprised that it's an amazing invention, I get it, but it has enough parts and complexity that this is just a heavy bike with an engine. And yet the complexity and the subtlety and the way it's evolved to fit us and what it allows for us, because it really transforms us into what it transforms us into is a quadruped, into a wolf or a deer, animals with their arms that's, go downwards. And, we have lots of fiction, for example, werewolves and other kinds of mythologies about humans having the ability to move like wolves or other quadruped. I say quadrupeds with their hands down, like mammalian quadrupeds, as opposed to, let's say, reptiles, which are sort of on the side, which is not what we really imagined when we imagined. You end up with a completely different physics. When you're a dog, your front legs are basically mimicking a wheel. It's just sort of a weird wheel where you have opposite sides, and the back are also mimicking wheel. You have basically a motorcycle kind of configuration on the typical mammalian quadruped that you end up experiencing on a motorcycle. And a lot of the same physics comes from that. So you get to really experience what it's like to be a wolf. And in a sense, you're a werewolf. You hop off and you're a human again. You hop on and you're a werewolf. And not just a werewolf, but you got speed and the power and you become one with it, and you're even emotionally expressing in your own unique way that's heard by the other animals on the street, the dumb, cars in the street, which are, don't have that kind of emotional intelligence and richness.
The book is Motorcycle Mind: The Secrets Behind the Coolest Invention Ever. It's in the usual places, although I think the paper edition is still waiting to come up, but there is an Amazon page for it.
Yeah, it's pre-orderable. You can get the ebook and you can pre-order the paperback. And yeah.
All right, so I'll have those links at tomwoods.com/2610, also in the video description. And is there a website you want to give people so they can find out more about you?
Yeah, just my last name, changizi.com. You can find all my TED Talks and Jordan Peterson talk a couple months ago, and the interview and things like that there. Yeah.
Okay, and so that's CHANGIZI.com, Changizi. All right, well, Mark, great pleasure having this opportunity to talk to you, and all the best with this latest project.
It was great to be here.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.